Hello and welcome to this video. You may have noticed that I look a bit different today. That is because I am not Josh, I'm actually his brother. He's told me a lot about a lot of you who want to see more of how the editing process is for his drum covers and how he mixes or how I mix them and how I make sure that they are ready for his covers. So I thought today that I'll go through that with you to show kind of my way of doing things. I'm going to start off by saying that I'm in no way a pro at this, and everything I have learned has been from the University of YouTube, or from the very brief time I spent doing this at university. But yeah, so let's just get started. So the first thing I like to do is I like to just have a little listen to the whole track, just to hear how everything sits with the kit and with the track itself. And I'll start to move around the individual volume faders. And then, yeah, just get a kind of general overview or mix going with the volume, and then from there I'll then start putting the effects on the channel strips and stuff. So what I normally do to start off with is I'll just have a listen to the track, and then I'll kind of adjust each volume fader for each part of the kit accordingly, so the kit is well mixed with the track. And to do this, I normally will solo the whole kit by itself, so I can just hear the kit, and then I'll bring in the actual track as well, just so I know where the levels are with that as well, and then yeah, just have a little play around with it. So that's what we'll do now. Just like to quickly say, there are two ways of mixing a drum cover. You can either go really over the top, so it's very apparent that the kit is sitting on top of the track, so you can hear the drums clearing out anything else on the track, or you can do more of a general mix, whereby you try to mix the actual audio of the drums into the track. Normally with Josh's stuff, what I like to do is I like to have it just above the point where it is mixed into the track, so it doesn't sound like it's so overpowering. It's just a kit with some really quiet background track in the background. So I'll do it as if you have the track, then you have the drums in the track, and then just above that is the kit. So that's what I'm going to go through and do now. Okay, cool. So that's more or less where I like to keep it. I pretty will tweak as I go after I start adding things like EQ and compression to each track, because as you do that, things do start to get a little bit louder, so you just have to pull things down. One thing I'm going to mention, which I do have, or this is something that I like to do, is I actually don't really like to put things like reverbs and general compression on every individual element of the drum kit. I actually like to have two more channel strips, as you can see here, which I like to call Verb and Comp. The Verb channel strip is a bus, which has a kind of a reverb on it that I like for the kit, and then the other one is a compression channel strip, which again, anything I bus to that will then get compressed. So for those of you who don't know what a bus is, essentially you can adjust the amount of send you have going from one channel strip to a bus. On the bus channel strip, you can put anything on there, so you can put things like reverbs, compressions, delays, anything like that, and essentially the amount of the channel track that you send to that bus will get affected in that proportion. So for instance, if I was to send, I don't know, like 3-4% of the kick in to the send verb, then you'd have about 3-4% of that signal that's being affected by that bus. What I like to first do, before I do anything to the buses, is I like to get a general EQ on everything, and then I like to go further and add some compression to some things with the bus. So what I like to do first, I like to do the kick drum first, then I'll do the snare tracks, and then I'll do everything else after that. So to me, they're the kind of two most important things. So how I like to do that is I like to take a little bit of the track which has got a lot of this particular drum in the track, and I like to just isolate that bit and put it on the loop, just so I don't have to keep on going back, pressing pause, playing, just going through it all over again. So here's fine. And now what I'm doing is I'm just soloing off the kick. So all you can hear now is the kick tracks, the kick in and the kick out. And then from here I can start adjusting the EQs individually. So I'll start the kick in. When it comes to EQing something, I don't really have any kind of definitive way that I do it. I really do it by ear. Of course, I know that certain instruments sit in different frequency bands, so I do try to keep that as true as possible, but then again, it all depends on the song that you're mixing it with. If you are playing a poppy song, then you will EQ the kick different to how you would EQ, I don't know, the kick drum in a heavy song, like a metal song or something. So if you are new to EQing, then I'm pretty sure there's loads of videos out there on how to EQ things, you know, professionally. But the best way I learned is just by playing and trial and error myself. So yeah, that's essentially how I learned how to do EQ. So really, all I've done so far is I've essentially boosted some of those low frequencies where you can see the kick drum kind of, you know, is most prominent in that region. So I've just boosted that a little bit just to give it a bit more, I know, bites to it, just because this is a pop song and it is kind of a little bit 80s sounding, and normally everything is very exaggerated in that kind of music. So I just like to kind of replicate that in how I EQ the kick drum and the snare. Then here, essentially what I'm doing now is I'm just lifting out for that higher frequency in the kick drum that almost sounds like the beater is slapping the skin on the drum. Sometimes it works quite nicely in the song, but I like to try and error with it out and with it in. So all I'll do there is I'll set a band EQ and I'll pull it right down, and I'll just sweep through the kind of mid EQ section, because that's normally where it sits, and I'll have a listen to where it is. And then if I can find it and I do like it without, then I'll kind of tailor that around it. But then again, if I do find that it sounds better with it in, or even a little bit, then I'll just adjust it accordingly. So that's what I'm going to do now. Okay, cool. So that will do for now. Of course, after I then go and EQ the kick out track, I may notice that together they do sound, you know, a little bit, you know, clashy, and I might want to kind of adjust things further. But that will do for now. So I'll go into the channel strip for the kick out, and I'll do the similar kind of process there. So another thing to bear in mind as well is if you're using something like Superior Drummer, you do have the option to map different microphones to different channel strips inside your DAW that you're using. So it is really good. It almost gives the impression of mixing an actual drum kit, because you do have a channel strip for the kick in, kick out. You can have more if you want to of Superior Drummer, but essentially the general difference between the kick in and the kick out is the kick out holds all the kind of sub bass frequencies, so it's a kind of more low end, more deeper side of the kick, and then the kick in is where you hear kind of all the dynamics come through of the actual kick drum itself. So that's from the beater itself. So you know, as I was saying before, that's where you hear the slap of the beater on the skin. So essentially, the kick out is the easiest to do because you're literally just listening out for the low frequencies, and it kind of complements the kick in and makes it sound more like an actual kick drum and less like, you know, a program bit of software. Then what I like to do, just for all really low frequency tracks, is I like to actually bring in a shelf, just so any of the high frequencies that might have bled through from the other tracks, of course, when we're doing this, you can actually, inside Superior Drummer, control the amount of bleed that you get from other microphones on the kit. So let's say that you've got a microphone on the tom, on an actual kit, as you record it, that microphone will start to pick up the other drums as well. So that's something called bleed. You don't really get a lot of bleed on the kick mics, but I just like to be sure that you won't get anything by, you know, just taking off a bit of the high in there. So now let's listen to the kick by itself again. Okay, cool. So I'm quite happy with that as it is by itself. So let's bring anything else back in and just see how it sits in terms of overall volume. Cool, so that's quite good for the time being. I probably will keep on going back to it and keep on adjusting it as I go through, as I said, but I'll leave that as it is now and I'll move on to the snares. So how we have the snare maps is we have the snare top, the snare bottom, and the snare comp mic. So essentially, a snare top, as you hear by itself, that would be as if the snare is being mic'd from the top. So again, you hear all the snap from the stick hitting the snare there, and then a snare bottom will be similar to the kick out. It's from on the underside. So you hear all the kind of snare wires going there. Some people like to completely take that out. So if you listen to a lot of kind of heavily processed music, you won't really hear a lot of that in it. So for this track, of course, as it is a pop track, I probably will take a bit more of that out because I don't really want to hear as much of those strings coming through, but you know, we'll have a little listen and we'll go for it. So for those of you who have never seen an EQ before, this analyzer section essentially shows you where the most fundamental frequencies are with that particular thing. So if I turn this back on, and then you can kind of see that here, this hump here is kind of where this particular mic is picking up the most of that frequency. So that is because it's at the top of the snare, so it's kind of getting that line from the snare, and that is what is being replicated here. So essentially I like to pull that up a little bit just to give it a bit more of a punch, and then also bring up some more of the kind of mid to high region just so I get a bit more of that clarity from the snare. Cool, so that's that one more or less finished. Cool, so this is the snare bottom track. So as I said, this is the one that is responsible for picking up on the snare wires. As I said, I tend not to kind of have too much of this in the actual track itself, because you can find that, you know, if it's too loud, then it is a little bit off-putting. But as you can see here, I don't really do anything too crazy with the EQs. I don't really get too complex with it, partly because, you know, I don't fully know all the ins and outs of what I could do with this. So, you know, as I said, I'm not a pro, but also because I feel like if you do start to process it too much, then it starts sounding, you know, more and more artificial. Okay, cool. So after I've kind of done the general EQ for each of the snares, I then like to hear them in the mix, just to hear how they sound with the kick, and more importantly with the whole track itself. So that's what I'll do now. So on this EQ, as you can see, it's quite simple. I've just put a shelf on the lower frequencies, shelf on the higher frequencies, because really the only frequencies that really come into play with the compression mic or the comp track for the snare is the kind of low to mid frequencies. So as you can see, I've put one kind of larger hump around 200 Hertz, then another one just below 800 Hertz. So now I have a little listen to it and just see how it sounds with the rest of the snare. Now we'll hear how it sounds with the kick. Now with the whole kit. Okay, cool. So it is quite apparent now that the kick and the snare are the loudest two components of the kick, even with everything else in. Generally, I do like to keep it this way. Of course, I will kind of adjust the volumes as I go through again, as I said, but in general, I like to have the kick and the snare most prominent, because that is normally what most people like to hear, or it's what I like to hear anyway, and it's normally these two things are the driving factor of a song, so I like to keep them very nice and prominent. And then anything else, like the kind of sparkly things in the high end, like the overheads, the kind of cymbals, the hi-hats as well, then I also like to have that. But how everything is actually set out in Superior Drummer is everything has its own individual pan. Essentially, those of you who don't know what pan is, pan essentially allows you to create what space certain parts of the kit is going from. So let's say you panned the kick drum far to the left, then you pan the hi-hats far to the right. That would mean that in the left ear you'd hear the kick, and in the right ear you'd hear the hats. But of course you also have this whole kind of sweep of places that you could put something. In general, we like to keep it from the drummer's perspective, so that means as if you are sitting behind the drum kit, how you would hear it as the drummer. So, you know, snares and kick are normally thereabouts in the middle, maybe a little bit to the left, so that's where they are to a drummer. Also, the hats are to the left, and then everything else at the racks and the floors are positioned to the right or middle to right, depending on how the kit's set up. So, yeah, that's actually a little bit about that. So yeah, what I'll do now is I'll then go and EQ the other elements of the kit, so let's start with the hats. So again, put a loop back on. Here's a good place. Cool. Now this is quite a again, a very simple thing to EQ, because you know there is only really one frequency they want to play with. Okay, so the actual hats on its own individual channel shape, that aren't very apparent. They're actually quite a bit more apparent in the overhead mics. So as I said, that's why it is quite simple to EQ the actual hat channel strip, because really you're not picking up a great deal of hats in this channel strip. Now it does sound quite odd, but then again, if you do think about it, normally the overhead mics are, you know, quite close to the cymbals, and they also do fundamentally pick up the hats quite a lot as well. So as I said, like that's why you could see around here, you kind of slightly see it come through, but not really too much. So really all I like to do is I like to just bring up that little bit of high end just so they can come through. So that's as simple as it is for that. And then the toms I like to keep to the end, because normally they're only played very infrequently, and it's, you know, quite a process going through the track and finding out where they are in order for me to do anything to them. So we'll do the overhead and the ambient microphones now. So start the overheads. So as you can hear, this picks up the whole kit. As you'd expect, it is overhead, so it does pick up everything. So the overheads, I do just like to kind of bring more of the cymbals out as opposed to anything else. Everything else is quite loud in general, so they're already easy to pick up by their own individual microphones. So the overheads, it's really, you know, the cymbals that I like to capture in that. Now this is the kind of trickier part of the overhead, is you kind of want to try and find out where the EQ for the hats are. This is something that I quite like to do, just to give, you know, a little bit more kind of to the hi-hats. It's quite a difficult process, and it normally isn't, you know, it isn't always easy straight away to see where it is, because you do have a lot of frequencies kind of mixing together in this kind of particular channel strip. But we'll give it a go and we'll see how we get on with it. Thereabouts, roughly. Of course, you know, this isn't a perfect science. It is just about what you can hear of your own ears. So that's done. Now the ambient, as you hear, is essentially all the room, all the kind of sound of the room itself that it's recorded in. Of course, we are using Superior Drummer, so you can change this. As you'll probably hear, it is quite a large room that we're playing in. You can hear a lot of the kind of reverberation from the walls and stuff in that particular room. So really, there's not really much that I like to do to this track. I just like to have it as a thing that I can bleed in to make it sound more like it's actually recorded in a room, as opposed to, you know, in some really isolated sound booth where everything just sounds dead and there's no life to it. So in general, I don't really do much of this. I'll just kind of bring up more and bring up less, all depending on how much of the room I like to keep in. Okay, cool. So everything's sounding more or less, you know, kind of in line with how I'd like it to sit volume-wise. But of course, this is going to change as soon as I start adding things like compression to it. So now I'm going to go and do the toms, because they are the last thing to have EQ'd onto them. So I think I did hear it here. Yeah, so here you hear them. You hear the rack anyway, so that, and have a little listen. Anytime you're EQing toms, it's quite good to go into it kind of with the mindset that toms do in general have quite a lot of overtones to them. So this is all down to personal taste. Some people really like to hear all those overtones ring out. Me personally, I like to kind of just hush them down a little bit, just so they're not so apparent, and so it sounds, you know, quite off. But normally, when everything else is in play, you can hear all the other drums. They're not quite hidden anyway, so it isn't a major thing. But I like to just kind of take them out a little bit, so that's what I'm doing now. So now what I like to do is I like to add just a very, very tiny bit of compression on the kicks and the snares, just to really make them pop through. So I can do that either by having them sent to the compression bus, as I said before, but I do like to kind of make it a bit more individual with these things. So although I might send them again to this channel strip again, just very small, like a small amount, I do like to kind of put an individual compression on these things. So that's what I'm going to do now. Let's go from here. Now inside this particular DAW, you obviously got your stock plugins. So this is just the compressor from Logic Pro. You do have different kind of types of compressors, which you can see at the top. So Platinum Digital, Studio VCA, and they all kind of give a different characteristic, a different like compression characteristic to it. So the first thing I do is I just listen to what they all sound like by themselves, and then I'll start adjusting things like their threshold and the ratio, just to make sure that, you know, I can kind of see the levels, stuff like that. But yeah, that's what I'm gonna do now, just kind of get an idea of what the individual characteristics are like. Okay, so it's very clear to hear that this is the most punchiest of them all. If I were to use this one, then I'd have to kind of really think about bringing it down, because it is extremely loud now that I've got this on. So just for purposes of this video, I probably won't use this one, just because, you know, it will kind of come with a lot more adjusting, which, you know, isn't really needed. So I do quite like the sound of the classic VCA. Again, it's also quite a simple one to kind of play with. But essentially we'll turn off any auto gain. So essentially what auto gain is essentially listens to the actual audio that's going through it, or does it listen to it? Of course, it's just a bit of software, but essentially what it'll do is it'll kind of add any kind of makeup gain that is lost when it's kind of taken in from the input and put to the output. So I like to turn that off, because, you know, then you kind of start to add more artificial things to it, and I don't really want to do that. Okay, so this isn't like a perfect way of doing things, and as I said, you know, I'm not an absolute pro at this, but essentially how I like to do it is I like to go through and look at the graph instead of the meter, just because you can kind of see where each kind of peak is in a waveform. So if I play it again, you'll kind of see all the activity happening here. And what I in general like to do is, of course, it all depends on the actual drum that you're, you know, compressing, but for a kick I like quite a fast release. So what I mean by that is, if you had to think visually, a faster release will mean that this kind of returning line up to kind of, well, nothingness, that'll jump back up a lot faster than if it would if it was a slow release. So I'll kind of show you what I mean by this, and I'm trying to give you a little, I just realised that you can't actually control the release time on this one, so I'll quickly go to a different one and I'll show you what I mean. Okay. So normally, as I bring the release time in the compressor, you'll see how it kind of starts to return slower. And you know, that's essentially what a release is how long does it kind of keep hold of the signal before it releases it and then starts compressing again. You tend to find that with things that kind of have a longer transient response, I guess we can call it that, things that aren't drums normally, and then you normally have the release time a little bit higher, but of course it all depends on how you want to EQ the kit. So I like to keep it quite punchy, so I'll bring the release time down just so it doesn't hold onto the actual signal too long, then it releases it quicker, which means it can start compressing the next part again. But as I said, like I'm going to use the classic VCA for this one, so we're not really going to talk too much about that. Okay, so just for this, I think this is kind of a good place to leave it. As you did see at the start, I did kind of bring out the output gain a little bit, because we do have the auto gain off here. I like to put a little bit of output gain on if it does, you know, make it quite a bit, you know, more quieter. Okay, yeah. So then after I do that, really what I do is I just copy this over to the other kick track. So if you're down on the keyboard shortcuts, you hold down Alt, and then you just basically drag and drop it to the other channel strip, and that'll copy it over. So essentially, I've now done the kick kind of compression, or what I like to do locally to the kick drum. So I'm going to have a little listen to them together. Okay, cool. So that sounds kind of more or less how I want it. Of course, if you aren't too sure about it yourself, let's say you put on some compression, and you're not really too sure if you can hear a difference, or if you know, I don't know, if you're just not too sure if you like the sound of it, then you can actually come and toggle off that particular effect here, have a listen to it without, have a listen to it with, and kind of just choose if you like it or not. Okay, cool. So I personally quite like the sound of that. So now we'll just go and do the same thing to the snare. So we'll go to the snare top. Okay, cool. So that was just a very, very quick one. As I said, that was basically just employing the same kind of things that I spoke about with a kick. It's not a perfect science, but you know, that's just how I do it. So we'll then copy that over to the other snare tracks. Normally, you know, you would kind of go through and do everything individually and, you know, get everything set up perfectly. But of course, this is a drum cover and we need to kind of think about that. It is not an actual mixed and mastered kind of track that's going to go out and be, you know, sold on iTunes. It is literally just for YouTube. So, you know, everything I do here, I do keep that in mind, and I try not to go too in depth with things, because normally these things aren't just what people pick up on from a YouTube video. So that's how I do it. And now I listen to the whole thing again, just kind of see where everything sits again. So now I'm going to go and put a individual compressor on the rack tom. There's a particular preset that I really like inside Logic. It's called Type U Fatten. For toms, I think it sounds really good. Type U Toms, sorry, they've changed the name of it. But normally this does make it quite considerably louder. So what I like to do is just go and listen to where that is. Cool, okay, so that's done exactly what I wanted it to. It's just essentially make that tom sound fatter, and you know, it's kind of almost in a way made it sound more in line with the actual track as opposed to an individual drum, which it did sound like before. So now that I've done that, I'm going to have another quick listen through, then we're going to start thinking about what things that you want to send to the individual buses. So, you know, that's normally the fun part to me. I quite like it when I start adding reverbs to things. That's when, you know, things start sounding really, really good to me. But, you know, have a little listen, see where we go from there. Okay, cool. So, you know, everything's sounding just about where I want it right now. So then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start to slowly bleed different parts of each channel strip to the bus, or send parts of those to the bus, and, you know, start affecting them in that way. So we'll start off with the compressor, because, you know, that's what we've been doing first. So I'm just going to slowly start adding a little bit of compression to things like the hats, because you do want those to be, you know, a bit more punchy. So what I'll do is, as you can see, it's some bus 2. So what you do, you come to the sends bar, essentially click there, go to bus, and you can actually see it has labelled it as to what you've already created. So bus 2 is comp, brings up this little wheel, and essentially what you do is, the more of this you bring up, it sends more of that signal to the bus. The less you send, you know, the less compressed it is, really. So again, have a little listen and just see how much we like. So as you can hear now, just by kind of sending that portion of this signal to the bus, you can already hear that it's come out a lot more in the mix, so it's a lot more apparent. And that is essentially what I use this compression for. So essentially, this compression is a Type U Fatten, as I've kind of mentioned before. But this just kind of, as it says, makes everything sound a bit more fatter. I can't remember if I've actually done any adjustments to this from what the actual stock preset is. Essentially, this project that I have up is one that just kept it as it is. So this verb and this comp is normally as it is for most of them. I do just use it more as a tool to kind of fatten things up. So I can't quite say or comment on if I've adjusted this in the past. I might have, but you can see the settings here. So if you wanted to use them yourself, you can. Cool, so those hats are definitely coming out a lot more now in the mix. So what I like to do is I like to add just a tiniest little bit of compression onto the overheads as well, just to make all the kind of cymbals and stuff kind of really shine through. So we'll go back to a part where he's playing the ride. Have a little listen. Cool. Okay, so that is that with the overheads. Again, I might sometimes like to add a little bit of, well, send a little bit of the kind of kick and the snare to this compression track. This really is all dependent on the cover itself. I don't do it all the time. I'm going to have a little listen now, kind of try and narrate it and see if I like the sound of it. So that's what I'm going to do now. I actually do quite like the sound of that. Of course, this song that I'm particularly doing, it is quite a poppy song, so I do like to kind of have everything, like the kick and the snare and the hats, come out a lot, because, you know, that's what's most prominent in this kind of style. So now what I'm going to do, have another listen to it with the track, and then we'll start thinking about reverb. Cool, okay, so I'm quite happy with that. Now I'm going to go through and start adding reverb to each individual thing. Normally, the reverb is the most apparent, to me anyway, on the snare. Okay, cool, so I'm quite happy with that. We've added a bit more compression, or we've sent some of the individual signals from the channel strip to bus 2, which is the compression bus. Now everything, you know, kind of kit-wise is sounding a lot more beefier, which is what I wanted. So now we're going to go through and start adding the reverbs. So essentially, with the reverb, it's most apparent to me with this kind of genre music on the snares. So I'm going to start with that. Just going to put a little bit of reverb on the snare to start with, and just kind of, you know, take it off and put it back on as to what sounds best for the track. So again, we'll take a little bit of the kind of track, just solo it off so you can loop it around over and again. And just have a little listen to this and create the bus, or create the send to the verb. Okay, cool. So it is quite a subtle thing. You can go really crazy with it, and, you know, as soon as you go past a certain threshold, normally it becomes so apparent in your face. So, you know, it is kind of, I guess, just up to you how much reverb you do want on it. But essentially, I'm not really too sure why, but anytime I do this, I notice that there's a certain point that if you pass that point, it's almost like you've got a small little bit of reverb, then as soon as you pass this one little point, you've got like all the reverb in the world, and it sounds really washed out. So I kind of think like I'm playing on the edge of it now. So again, you know, I might go back and adjust it slightly, but we've got a bit of reverb there, so we'll go through and we'll add it to the other things like the hats and the rack and the overheads and stuff like that. That is more or less where I like it. Of course, you do hear a lot of the hats in the overhead anyway, and you also get quite a lot of the room reverb from the ambient, so ambient track. So I don't really want to kind of put too much on there. There is quite a lot on there, but that's because you do have to put quite a lot on sometimes until you can actually hear the effect of it, or at least until I can hear the effect of it. So that's what I've done there. Now I'm going to go to the rack and do the same thing there. I actually forgot to mention, the actual reverb that I'm using is a stock one with Logic. It's the Space Designer. Again, this is something that I just kind of leave and set, so anytime I bring in another cover from Josh, it's already there and it's already kind of set up. But I quite like the sound of this 1.4 second long reverb, which is a small concert hall sound. You've got a lot of things to choose from: large spaces, medium spaces, small spaces. So of course, if you're playing, you know, a cover that's, you know, to a more boxy sounding song, one that's more, you know, kind of, I don't know, short, I guess, in nature, doesn't really make sense, but you know what I mean, then you can kind of come here and adjust that. So if you did want to play like some really big ballad, you might put on a longer reverb, like a large space, and then you might go into, I don't know, plate and, you know, really play with it. But essentially this is what I keep it to. I don't really change anything with this. You know, I could go into it and I could change it, but as I said before, it is a cover, so if we start getting too technical and taking up too much time, then, you know, it just becomes a bit excessive for what we actually hear. So that's kept as it is, just a 1.4 second reverb. And yeah, so continue with this. Okay, now I'm going to hear it in context of the whole kit. So let's go to a point. Okay, cool, so that's sounding pretty good to me. Sounding kind of like how I want it to sound. So, now we have 5 minutes left from record time on this. Do you reckon you can wrap up in 5 minutes? Yeah. Cool. Okay, cool, so, you know, that's sounding pretty good to me now. So, essentially, what I'll do now is I'll kind of go through them. I might, you know, kind of just have a little bit more of a tweak with the overall volumes, but then, you know, that's about it, really. I don't really do much more than that. It is just a drum cover, and I think it's really important to remember. It's a drum cover for YouTube. It's not, you know, going to any record label. It's not like it's going to be sent out to the masses. So it is good just to keep this kind of short and simple. You can kind of see that I don't really go overboard with any kind of effect or anything. It's just EQ, just compression. And, you know, that is basically about it, and some individual volume tweaking. But, you know, there really isn't much to it. So going to go through, listen to it once more, adjust some things like the volumes of each track, and then that'll be it. So that's what I'm going to do now. Cool, okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. I'm pretty sure Josh would be pretty happy with that. So yeah, that is basically my whole process. As I said, really simple, just EQing, compression, and I've got some sends going to an individual reverb and an individual compression channel strip. Other than that, it's just 3 key components: volume, EQ, and compression, and you're done basically. So I really hope that this video was beneficial for you. I hope you learned something from it. You know, it's not the kind of perfect way to do it, but it's definitely the way that's worked for us, you know, over the many years of doing drum covers with Josh. So again, hope you enjoyed it, and, you know, subscribe. Thank you.